We don't have privacy in America. We gave it up for AI in the interwebs. Anyway, I'm here to continue the recording of. I'm hoping I can get through it all before I have to go get my tattoo. All right, naughty list. This is a decent chapter. I don't think it will be overly emotionally wrenching. Chapter 20, The Naughty List, Kandahar Airfield, 2001. Christmas at War, I'll probably say Afghanistan. Maybe not everybody knows. Although I read an essay once about how Americans learn geography through where we go to war. Chapter 20, The Naughty List, Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan, 2011. Christmas at war is depressing, to say the least, regardless of the cheer officers and enlist. This is why you're not supposed to drink coffee with milk when you're recording. Thanks, friend. Thanks for being here. Chapter 20, The Naughty List, Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan, 2011. Christmas at war is depressing, to say the least, regardless of the cheer officers and enlisted leaders try to sprinkle around. There are the ubiquitous Girl Scout cookies, boxes stacked sky high everywhere you look, thanks to the campaign to get people to buy cookies for soldiers. There's the colonel in his Santa hat, carrying a big red bag around. We get special holiday food for a few days, but we still have to eat it out of the same green Mermite containers we eat all of our meals out of, which usually contains meat that, according to Army folklore, comes out of packages labeled not for resale, for use by the Department of Corrections and the Department of Defense only. It doesn't have to be true. The irony of this pairing is not lost on us. Soldiers and prisoners, eating the same food, serving our time at the mercy of our superiors to tell us what to wear, what to eat, where to live. They try hard to tell us what to think, too. It is impossible not to feel the weight of being over here and all we're missing. Of Sergeant First Class Taylor not getting to watch his kids open their presents, or how Specialist Paulette is missing his young wife on their first Christmas as a married couple. Everyone has people they are far away from, a life that's still spinning back home. Everyone except me. I spent the last few Christmases with Jeff's family, but I wouldn't have had anywhere to go this year anyway. Might as well spend it making money and getting better at my job. At the end of my Christmas Day shift, as I grab my bag to return to my bunk to spend another night binging Gilmore Girls, Sergeant First Class Lugo calls me over. My heart jumps when I see the Christmas presents piled in the break area. In all my life, I've only received a handful of things for Christmas, mostly from Jeff and his parents, or the little tokens that Mary and I, or my college girlfriends, exchanged. As a kid, we were only worked harder during the Christmas season and didn't get gifts. We were never even allowed to have toys. I quickly see that they are joke gifts. For Captain Madison, the unwavering Eagles fan, a Patriots hat. For a Puerto Rican specialist, a little desktop flag of Mexico. For the lieutenant who missed her cat, a spit roast for cats. I smile as I unwrap my gift, curious to see what the joke will be about me. I pull out a small red velvet bag that contains what feels like rocks. It reminds me of the little colorful velvet bags sold to tourists in Belo Horizonte, which came full of the polished, semi-precious gemstones that the region famously mines. It reminds me of home, or at least the idea of having a home. I pull one out, and it is a rock. A black, dense but chalky rock that is getting my hands incredibly dirty as I hold it. Everyone on the team around me is laughing, and I totally do not get it. A bag of coal, ma'am? Specialist Paulette helpfully nudges, and I look at him with a blank expression. I know there's a joke here, and I know I'm supposed to be getting it, but I'm not. Seriously, Daniela? Captain Madison teases. Santa Claus? Naughty list? I don't know the first thing about Santa Claus, or what he has to do with a bag of coal, and I realize I'm going to have to tell them why. I try to laugh it off, still determined to hold on to the day's brief feeling of cheer. I tell them my parents were the kind of religious that didn't do Santa Claus. Okay, let me get this straight, Captain Madison says. The intended joke is that Lieutenant Mestinek is on the naughty list, but the actual joke is that she doesn't even know about the naughty list? Oh, this is rich. And everyone is laughing, and I am laughing with them, because of course, it is pretty hilarious. Then all of a sudden, I find myself walking away quickly, tears blinding me, desperately needing to get to the nearest empty bunker. I refuse to break the #1 rule of being a woman in the United States Army. Never let anyone see you cry. I'm sobbing hysterically, gasping for air, trying not to just scream and scream and scream at the bright stars of Afghanistan overhead. A dam has broken inside me, releasing a torrent of emotions that I have been trying to hold back for years. And I know there's nothing I can do to hold them in anymore. It is so much, so heavy all the time. The exhaustion, the worry, the constant acting, masking everything I think or feel in order to fit some ideal of perfection. And for what? I've spent my life trying to pinpoint what exactly defines an American. I have studied it. I have tried to mimic those traits and play that role. I realize all my acting has been futile. There is only one thing I know for certain. I will never be normal. I don't even know the most basic things about Santa Claus. One of the most American things there is. Problematically dropped a stitch. It's a double stitch, and now I have to fix it. Hello, Gemini. Okay, this is crazy, right? I hate astrology because our cult leader was obsessed with it. I'm very triggered, like when people are like, what sign are you? Ugh. But my two best friends from two different parts of the world, two different parts of my life, one day apart, Geminis. And I'm like, every time I'm like reading something or seeing something that is no, I don't think you're Guinevere Turner. I was reading Guinevere Turner's book, When the World Didn't End. I'm like, oh my God, I relate so much to this writer. And then I'm like, oh, and she's a Gemini. So I was just telling my husband, I was like, obviously I don't think it's like the stars influencing our personality, but like there's something about the time of year that you're born that like, or it's just that all the Geminis I know are neurodivergent, and so I think they're all the same as me. Okay. There is only one thing I know for certain. I will never be normal. I don't even know the most basic things about Santa Claus, one of the most American things there is. And then I am laughing again, It is so ridiculous. How could I ever hope to know any of the rest of it? How could I ever have kids and raise them without all of this cultural confusion? How would I ever be able to truly relate to a partner? I don't want these feelings to kill me. I figured that out earlier in the year when I had almost jumped from a watchtower, but something stopped me. Some yearning to go on, to keep trying to prove everyone wrong. Maybe the real problem is loneliness. Maybe I just need a man. One who's both a quintessential American man, but can also put up with my strangeness. I shiver as I think of Jeff, who I now realize, after all the time and space offered me by nearly 1 year at war, wasn't the definition of American I had thought he was. He was trying so hard to buy into an ideology of America, one that made him, by default, better than others who weren't American, or anyone who was a different kind of American. American exceptionalism, I learned it was called. No different than the little spoiled girl whose daddy told her over and over she was the prettiest girl in the world. But now she's full grown and it's time to be other things, but she still holds on to the original lie with all her heart. Because who is she without it? There must be American men who are open-minded. Surely it's possible to like both American football and country music, or even guns, and still enjoy salsa dancing and food that tastes like something? Surely there are men who love being American, but still realize that America is just one little piece in a whole puzzle much bigger than them. Maybe being in the army will actually help me find that guy. Maybe some of them aren't toxic, competitive blowhards that think killing people is sexy. And maybe I just haven't met him yet. Maybe there are other people who are also questioning what we are doing over here, rather than just drinking the Kool-Aid that generals and colonels pour down our throats. It isn't a question of winning or losing. We all know we aren't winning. But a question whether we have the moral right to be over here doing any of this in the first place. What does America stand for at all? Everyone talks about American values. But after nearly a decade in character, studying America, I have yet to see a list of values that anyone can agree on. By the time I'm ready to leave the bunker, after making sure my face doesn't look too red and my voice doesn't sound too shaky, I have decided 2 things. Number 1, I'm not going to hide myself anymore. What's the point? If I can't ever be normal, maybe the answer is to lean into the ways I'm different and stop trying so hard to fit in. Number 2, I'm going to find myself the quintessential American man. Oh my God, my throat's too dry. I think I need to make tea. Hello, Miss Amish. I'm recording my video memoir. I think that's just what I'm going with. Vidmoir. I don't know what to call it, but I'm recording a thing that I wrote intending to turn it into a book. But instead of turning it into a book, I'm turning it into a video of me reading the book to you. Yes, I'm gonna go make some coffee. Tea with honey. But this is my problem. You can't drink enough caffeine if you're busy drinking tea with honey. And as I always say, never trust a veteran who doesn't drink caffeine. Or just coffee. 1, because they're probably a Mormon. Saw this meme that was like, see, 1 cup of coffee a day is good for you. It means you won't be a Mormon. You're not in danger of becoming a Mormon. Oh, thanks. Yeah, about the honest account of the military. I mean, we're all trying to get a handle on that, and I even look at Uncultured, and I see reviews that are like, yeah, she's still a little indoctrinated, and the U.S. Army is great, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. not even 2.5 years after, well, it's like 3.5 years, because it's final a year before it comes out. I did not get my shop back. No. But did you know that Linktree has a shop? Go when you're done here, check out my Linktree. You flip over to the shop tab and you can just list all of your products there. So you need to do that too, because you should have some Misfit Amish merch, and I can totally teach you how to do that. Out of creamer. Oh, I know. I hate drinking black coffee. I hate it so much. And I've definitely had, because of course I'm a veteran, so I know tons of people that think they are caffeine meisters. All the vet bros, especially because I worked in veteran entrepreneurship, right? So like every other vet bro has a coffee company with a rifle on the cover. And they get super mad at you when you drink black coffee. And like, I get it. Like, I feel like when women say they like wine and then they say their go-to is Moscato, I'm like, oh, so you're like a baby wine drinker. Which is the same as when you say that your favorite form of salsa dancing is merengue. And then when you get over to like Pinot Noir and bachata, you're like in the middle. And then finally when like a cab and a salsa is your favorite, like, okay, now you're a dancer, now you're a wine drinker. And I understand that coffee's the same, but I'm just happy to stay in the bachata zone with my coffee with milk in it. Because I think coffee with milk feels like a hug, and black coffee is just that. And we had so much spy work going on to keep the intelligence office and therefore the battalion stocked with creamer for our coffee. And there's this whole hashtag stories not in the book where I tell Mr. Young that he can go to my office and tell my deputy, Lieutenant Wilson, that he can have the box, and ask him if he can take a box of creamer back to his fob, because knowing that like my lieutenant can get another one the next day. Mr. Young just walks up to this lieutenant and it's like, Captain Messeneck said I can have your creamer. And he's like, okay. And I was like a whole jerk for 18 hours or whatever till I could explain it to him. Is it impossible to find a publisher for what? Like I very successfully found a publisher for Uncultured, and I'm actually going to, this is going to be one of the series I do on TikTok, or one of, like I'll release this in my Patreon too if you're a subscriber, links all in bio. It's just like, I finished listening to Educated in 2018, and I said, I'm going to write the next one of those, and in 2020, out came Uncultured with, in the vein of Glass Castle and Educated on the thing. I had this lovely picture of it surrounded by like every good book, including Michelle Obama's for Women's History Month from Goodreads. And so that one, I would say, like I had a process, and the reason that I think I have a major book out is not because I had an incredible life story or I'm an incredible writer. It's because I'm a good military planning officer. And I can't guarantee anyone else the same journey, and if somebody tries, they're trying to deceive you. But I can put my process out there and show people that it is possible to get done. UnAmerican is much trickier because the premise of UnAmerican is that I found out some information, which, spoiler alert, but this is the recording of UnAmerican, was that my ex-husband was a white supremacist and I needed to testify against him to kick him out of the military. And I find this out 3 days before Uncultured sells in this big deal. And I say that because it's like the story is already written when you sell the book proposal. I just go back and add him into the chapter of my life that I had written him out of. But the story was already done. And I was just like, I'm going to have to do this all over again. I'm going to have to like re-go through my life and look at all of my same stories about, it's a peacock, about leaving the cult, about being in the military, but just through a different lens. And so that's what UnAmerican is. Instead of looking at these stories through the lens of group behavior, we're looking at it through the lens of power, privilege, whiteness, otherness, and what it means to be un-American / un-American. And I had a great book, I was a dream author, I was optioned by my publisher, and which means like they want to see whatever I write, nonfiction, first, and have a month to make up their mind. And then so as soon as I gave them the text for UnAmerican, which by the way, they put it in your contract that you can't publish anything else until you deliver them their manuscript. And I was like, why would they do this? And then 2 weeks later, when I already wanted to start working on the next thing, I was like, oh, this is why they do this. And by the way, that's why the penny erotica market exists, because these women can't publish under their own names. So while they're working on their books, they, for their own creativity, go write an erotic novel and then put it up on the internet for 99 cents or whatever. And some of them have made millions of dollars. There's a fun documentary about that. I can't remember what it's called. Something clever. Just look at Netflix and erotica documentary in publishing or something. But anyways, my senior agent is on that thing explaining it. So anyway, we worked on UnAmerican, we got it to this, just in order to write the book proposal, we had to write out this 150-page thing telling ourselves the story just so that we could condense it down. And by we, I mean I telling myself the story, and me and my co-writer condensing it down for chapter summaries. And then the thing that never crossed our mind, any of us, was the publisher just didn't want it. And that had a lot to do with, I'm glad my mom died being the viral book that fall and not Uncultured. So, I think if Uncultured had sold 1 million copies, then UnAmerican would be coming out right now. But instead, they liked the idea of me writing a book called Culting of America. So I started on that one and I just put UnAmerican as this is never coming out. Because the thing was that UnAmerican, because it's just another look, the way publishing contracts are written, anything that is the story of my life from leaving a cult and joining the army can potentially activate my non-compete clause. So I was basically thinking I'll just leave it alone 4 or 5 years. I'll just go back to my publisher and be like, hey, can I have the rights to this? I have the rights, right? But can you just say a thing that means you won't sue me if I go try to publish this with somebody else? And my publisher's wonderful. I'm sure it would have been fine. But as I've been building all my things online on my platform and trying to see just the different ways, I'm all about if you're a white collar worker, that means you sell your brain to a company. If you sell your brain to a company, that means you can sell your brain to yourself, right? That's what consultants do, basically. They just go out and find the clients. And then I work on whatever that service is that I'm selling to the client. How do I turn that into a product, right? So right now, people can pay me $100 an hour to sit with me and hear about the writing process and take from it what they can. But as soon as I get the time, I will turn that into a little mini course that you can just buy for $10.99 or something on my website. And then now I have productized that part of my brain, and that's a product I can make money on forever, same as this video. So I was thinking about that, and also because all of you tell me what you want, and what everyone says is I could listen to you talk for hours. Several times I have been like, you can. Uncultured is an audiobook, and they've been bought it now. So I just decided I can't publish this as a book, but I can publish a video of me reading this to people. That can in no way be seen as competing with Uncultured, especially since, I will highly encourage you to read Uncultured first, just so you have more context for this. And yes, it's on audio. I am still working on Culting of America. That is so basically right now I spend half my day building the platform and then half my day working on Culting of America, but that's only 3 days a week when I have childcare after school. And then the last thing I would say about the whole selling your brain to yourself thing is that it takes some years. It is a enhanced photography. So this artist, Jason Matias, he has a TED Talk called Beautiful Things That No Longer Exist. And yes, I got him that TED Talk. And so he takes the photo and then he just enhances it with whatever, computer tools. Like if you take a snapshot right now, you can zoom into this so far to see like the snow on the trees. I mean, it's amazingly done. And then he has other ones we have over there. We have this red Japanese maple we call the fire tree that was destroyed by a storm. And anyway, I told him he had the title "Beautiful Things Beautiful Things That No Longer Exist," and I was like, that needs to be a talk. Like, let's do it. So we performed at the same TEDx. That was fun. Which, by the way, I have a TED Talk. It's just Daniela Young, Lost in Transition. I also think it's funny. I keep trying to tell, like, military people, like, y'all have lost the fight for the term transition. When you put transitioning veteran on your LinkedIn, you're not saying what you think you're saying to the rest of the world.
I need you to just send me the manuscript, please.
Okay.
I can't tell where things start and end.
I'm sorry. He's wonderful. He's the only reason we're probably going to get this out on time. I hope. I learned a very good lesson not to announce a publishing date before your product is complete. But also, you know, we're both veterans. We know how to work straight through something until it's done. That was another thing that was so crazy about the writing process. Like, everyone, so they gave me 6 months to deliver Uncultured, right? So 6 months to write a book that needed to be a bestseller. And I delivered it in 5 months. But everyone was just congratulating me so much on like getting my thing in by the deadline. And meanwhile, I am this soldier going like, that's an option? Like, you can just not meet a deadline and the entire globe doesn't explode? Yeah. So, it was strange to me when I was in the corporate world too. And in fact, this is why Amazon loves to hire veterans, because they know they can just work them into the ground. Because we have no sense of boundaries for ourselves. All right. You ready to go? Oh, look. Got several Patreons. Okay. The thing you should all take away from this is that the audio is hard on your body more than your voice, I think. Just having to just like sit up all day and breathe deeply. Okay. Chapter 21, Trivial Pursuit, Clarksville, Tennessee, 2013. Professionally, things couldn't be better for me. I'm the senior intelligence officer for my whole battalion and the primary threat and security counselor to the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Halter, a man I love working for. I'd been given the job the day after returning from the Kandahar deployment, even though I was still then almost 2 years away from being a captain. And maybe even more miraculously, I feel like I actually belong. I've tried to make good on my promise to myself and have opened up about my past. And it lost the place. Nope. Start that one over again. Save Mr. Young some time. Chapter 21, Trivial Pursuit, Clarksville, Tennessee, 2013. Professionally, things couldn't be better for me. I'm the senior intelligence officer for my whole battalion and the primary threat and security counselor to the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Halter, a man I love working for. I'd been given the job the day after returning from the Kandahar deployment, even though I was still then almost 2 years away from being a captain. And maybe even more miraculously, I feel like I actually belong. I have tried to make good on my promise to myself and have opened up about my past, have stopped trying to hide all the ways that I'm different. Like Jeff, my buddies in the Lieutenant Mafia call me UnAmerican whenever I'm clueless about some cultural thing. But unlike Jeff, it's all good-natured teasing, and I laugh along with them. Tonight is trivia night at our local watering hole, and of course I'm useless when it comes to anything about pop culture, but I have a knack for figuring out the meaning of obscure words and know lots of random facts about countries around the world. We have named our team President Obama Doesn't Care About Your Phone Sex, a joke referencing the recent Edward Snowden / This is WikiLeaks scandal, and that's the wrong scandal. We have named our team President Obama Doesn't Care About Your Phone Sex, a joke referencing the recent Edward Snowden scandal that has Americans enraged by the thought that the government is listening to them. And here we are, a team of military security and operations professionals getting ready for war, who know that things are given a classification level based on how many Americans would die as a result of that information being available to the general public and to other countries' spy networks. We know exactly what impacts Snowden's leaks have rained down upon our current operations. Our job isn't to be liked, it's to go along with the messaging. It's us versus the civilians, to protect them from themselves. As always, the ends justifies the means. Like my childhood in the cult, Jeff is a painful part of my past I am learning how to talk about, and somehow the conversation moves tonight in that direction. The boys are stuck on the fact that Jeff had identified as gay before I met him, and can't wrap their heads around my marrying him despite knowing that. They assume that's the main reason I wanted a divorce, and I tell them it was more complicated than that. But I don't elaborate. What they want to hear are juicy details about the divorce, how Jeff tried to threaten me to stay in the marriage, how he sent my commander a letter accusing me of a crime, adultery, of course, the go-to offense for women in the military. And even though it was illegal, I tell them about how I recorded our phone conversation without Jeff's knowledge, so I have proof that he was setting me up. I think again of Snowden, the whistleblower, and the impact that recording conversations can have. I know I got lucky getting out of that marriage with my career intact and only $60,000 in debt. Hopefully, the only time I'll have to hear of Jeff again is when the Army undoubtedly contacts me in 8 years, when they make the rounds of background checks for his security clearance renewal. Bro, quit. Like, you're cute, but no one wants to hear you. A few weeks later, I'm out for a run with my crew in the shadowy hours before dawn, feeling good, feeling strong and free, the way I do when I'm dancing. These are the only times when I feel fully in my body, when I can get my mind to stop going 100 miles per hour, when I feel unburdened by the ghosts of the past that seem to chase me no matter where I go. It is the time I feel most safe. And so it takes a long time for me to understand what I am seeing in front of me. Time seems slow as I fully register that it is no one other than Jeffrey Poole, my ex-husband, who I have not talked to in 2 years, running at a fast clip toward me. And then I am falling deep down back into the hole I have spent the past years digging myself out of. The thing about being at the 101st Division is that everyone comes through here eventually. I can only hope that Jeff is assigned here on a temporary duty. He's scanning the pack of us like everyone does. I will myself to be invisible, wondering if the internal changes I've made since I knew him will render me unrecognizable. When his icy green eyes bore into me, I am caught. Trapped. I can feel his big hands, which I used to find so beautiful, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I remember how he said to my mom, in his campaign to turn my family against me, that he couldn't understand why I was leaving him, that he'd been a good husband because he'd never hit me, he'd never hurt me. I wondered what he would do to me now if he had the chance, what he would have done if I hadn't gotten out when I had. He passes without saying anything, and I'm on the side of the trail, gasping for breath, feeling Jeff pull away everything I've worked so hard for. The world that I had built, that had seemed so steady just moments before, was spinning wildly out of my grasp, and I was powerless to stop it. My colleagues tell me to drink water, to walk it out. I let them believe the hill was just too much for me, that I needed a breather. Captain Mestenek tapping out on a run should have been their first sign that something else was wrong. As much as I've let them in, there are things I will never be able to tell them. About a man's power to steal my breath. About this fear I don't understand that is always pursuing me, dancing just a few steps outside my vision. About all the things that still make me feel so powerless in this intricate dance of life and systems and individuals and power. And as I catch my breath and start again, I wonder if I will ever be able to outrun him. Yeah, and I was in the military at the time when it was used to avoid jail. I joined during the surge, and now it is too hot to wear this anymore. We've got one sleeve complete. I just spoke your feelings about your ex, yeah. This is why I say Taylor Swift never wrote a song about any dude. She wrote it about herself and her feelings. And people are like, Dear John. I'm like, no, Dear John is the perfect portrayal of what it is like to date a narcissist and what that does to you and what that feels like. Like, she's writing about her own feelings. That's why people relate to it. Like, anyways, that was the advice someone told me. If you're going to write a controversial book, write it 1,000% through your perspective. Because it is much, much harder for people to argue with you when you're like, this is my lived experience. Now I have to sit here and talk to you while I put all these neck stitches on the needle. Because I don't think I can do that and record reading at the same time. Wish more people were talking about the culty childhood to cult leader pipeline. I mean, So first of all, that's one of the reasons that I say, like, beware of people that know a lot about cults or like bad leaders. And then people are always like, oh, so you mean you? I'm like, yes. If I invite you to my compound in the mountains, maybe think about saying no. But yeah, and you know, the one of the best ways I heard this described was in a parenting book, and it was saying we learn both sides of every relationship that we're in. Meaning, if you've been in an abusive, toxic relationship, that you also know how to be an abusive, toxic person. And I actually know quite a few women from cults who end up being the ones that are kind of the emotionally abusive ones in their relationships and have to go get like counseling and heal that part. But yeah, we know how to do it. I said to my husband in a tongue-in-cheek way, like, no, I'm going to do this book thing, and I'm going to do it in a big way because I know how to be a cult leader. And I mean, what was super interesting was in my organizational psychology course, like, so many people would be like, is it really ethical for us to be studying this stuff? Because like motivation is manipulation of human emotions, right? And so like this is what we're getting good at. And my only answer is like, well, I mean, the bad guys are studying it, so but this is ultimately my problem. And so I think it was my husband. It was somebody that told me to call myself the disorganizational psychologist, because I've decided I much rather help individuals understand the groups and systems that they're in or that have impacted them rather than selling my not, I can't think of the word. Anyways, selling my quite obvious skills at manipulating people to corporate America so that they can motivate you to give your labor and help you build their good cults. Help them build their good cults. I'm wondering how so many former compounds come up for sale. I mean, you know, for children of God, this is specifically one of the reasons they go abroad, because you can live in Brazil. I mean, the most shocking thing to me, one of the most shocking things to me about landing in America was that you just had a 5-bedroom house just on the street that people can just walk up to. Because in Brazil, that is a compound, essentially. That is behind a wall with a gate. And so, you know, usually we lived in places that had one house for a fairly big family, and then just teenage slave labor will build you a bunch more houses on the property. And every once in a while, the like rental, like the landlord would be coming by, and so then everyone would have to leave so they could pretend it was just like one family living there, which is so ridiculous. Which is, of course, if you were here for the Oasis chapter, when they got that corrupt federal police guy buying them properties, it was great, because the landlords knew what was going on. Giant houses. Yeah, it's true. HGTV doesn't address a lot of stuff. Like how someone who's like a consultant for Happy Pets is like buying a 550K house or something. But yeah. $1. Yeah. It is nice to go to Brazil with American money, that is for sure. Much less nice to go to Europe in American money, which I had to do as a college student. And I basically got a free study abroad, including living arrangements, but I had to prove that I had 5,000 euros in a bank account, which was difficult. Fortunately, because of scholarships, I had 5,000 euros in a bank account for about 2 weeks. The Germans do not play around. So funny. Also, the only people I encountered pretty much the whole time I was in Germany that didn't speak English were the people that worked at the passport office. I live in any of the areas affected by flooding. Areas of Brazil? Brazil price for the visa, is that for the visas? Because they did put that back, which is very sad. Smart for them, but yeah, Brazil long had this policy where like, you all charge us for visas and you're gonna pay $200 to come to our country too. So Canadians, free. Americans, $200 a person. Then for like 5 years there, they stopped. Oh, you're talking about something different. You have to prove you have money. Yeah, then for a while there, they stopped requiring the visa fee. It's in 2020 when I went last. They were not. Beginning of 2020. There was one moment where we thought maybe we had brought COVID from Seattle to Brazil, but turns out no. It's also fascinating. So we were in Brazil as COVID was silently spreading during Carnival. So first of all, the Super Bowl weekend is when the most Americans get together and share space. And then literally 2 weeks later, you had Carnival in Brazil. And I wonder if COVID had come in April instead of when it came, like if it would have not spread as wildly. But it was interesting. So we were in Buenos Aires when we were in Brazil and we were in Chile. By the time we got to Buenos Aires, things were closing down. Actually, I talk about this in the end of this book. And then all of a sudden it was like the military marching down the streets, not letting anyone out of their houses. And we were on the last flight out. Meanwhile, Brazil is one of the only Latin American countries that did very, very poorly with COVID because Bolsonaro was a huge Trump fanboy. But like in Argentina, when the cops come, or when the military comes marching down the streets and tell you to stay in your house, they don't like come out of their houses talking about freedom. They just stay in their homes. So that was interesting. And then we came back and we'd sold our house because we were going to travel the world for 2 years while getting our degrees after Tom retired, and I was going to write a book about it called Chasing Summer. And then instead, we ended up, well, first of all, we house sat for some very rich people who were stranded somewhere else, and we only didn't kill one of their dogs. That's not serious. One of their dogs got brain cancer and died very rapidly while they were all stranded in another country. Not stranded, but quarantined. And then we ended up in a 44-foot RV when they got home. And we ended up driving around the country during the summer of 2020 and Black Lives Matter. And that is one of the last chapters of this book that is called Salt of the Earth. Came up with the whole concept for the book, and then the co-writer was like, okay, but it doesn't really have a climax yet. And I was like, let me tell you this one story. She was like, yeah, that's the climax. So hopefully we get there. I think it's only a few chapters away. But I have to be done by noon so that I can go get my tattoo. I do this in school too. I have an hour of reading and I'm done with that project. I'm like, nope, just take a break, get it started again. Well, take me longer to try to read it without something to do with my hands. Oh yeah, we're not far away at all. Yeah, I'm gonna do it here. And it does have to be pretty big, like it's probably gonna be most of my arm. It's gonna be, I know everyone says cursive is hard, and I thought about doing it with like typewriter style, but my husband was like, nope, sorry, you're cursive. Like, I sent him a letter every day after they banished him from me, and like, it's all in cursive. My signature on my book, my website, so I'm like, okay, I'm going with a cursive. Hopefully it's easy enough. Here we go. Chapter 22, The Graveyard of Empires, Lisbon, Portugal, 2013. Sean is easily the best salsa dancer out of 30,000 people on the base at Kandahar, and he knows it. He's a black man from New York City, over 10 years older and 2 ranks above me, but in Navy intelligence. We start out as dance partners, but after our return to the States and on a dance-filled trip to Miami with friends, we become more. As happens with so many of my relationships, it ends when he is stationed elsewhere for 3 years. I think about him often, wondering if he is the one who got away, if he is the quintessential American man I am looking for. So, after a year and a half, I email him. Let's meet somewhere in Europe. We travel so well together. Won't it be a blast? He responds immediately, giving me a choice. Commitment or nothing. I don't just want to travel with you, he writes. I want us to be together, like permanently. What do you think? I think maybe I am ready to have a future. It's so easy to imagine him as my perfect match, and I'm so incredibly lonely. So we plan our trip to salsa dance across the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal to make some memories that will sustain me over the long months of an upcoming deployment. In the months leading up to it, we exchange long emails, catching up on what has changed in our lives in the missing years. I've always thought I would marry you someday, he says in one of his last emails before the trip. It doesn't take long for reality to set in once we get there. I want it to be more. I flew halfway around the world for it to be more, but it's not feeling like it. I tell myself I'll get over it. I want to love this man, and I know he wants to love me. And when we sit in a plaza in downtown Madrid, drinking red table wine, salsa dancing, and talking about what our future might look like together, it feels glorious. Sean is everything I am supposed to want. One evening, when we get back to the hotel room, everything feels wrong. I can't do what I've done so often in the past, when I know someone wants me, but I have no idea what I want. When I can just leave my body a little bit as I go through the motions, as I put the rest of myself in a box. Their desire has always been enough to overcome mine. And I've begun to leave my box. But I've begun to leave my box, and this time it feels like submission, like I'm trading my body and myself for security. And even though I know Sean would never mean it, his passion feels like violence. After a few days, I know I can't keep going, not for 3 weeks, and certainly not permanently. I spend hours crying in the bathroom at night after he falls asleep, not seeing a way out. Every day, I feel more and more like I can't breathe. The things I'd liked about him, that I'd idolized and imagined during our times apart, now begin to grate on me. He'd always joked about not being able to speak a word of Spanish, but it starts to bother me that he won't even say gracias to the taxi drivers, insisting on saying thank you, because they for sure understand that. Everyone in the world does. And I can't get it out of my mind, through Sean's cosmopolitan clothes and dapper international air, that this is just the kind of thing Jeff would do and say. Everything had changed, it felt, when he'd stopped looking at me as a dance partner, as a fun Miami vacation fling, and started looking at me as a future wife. Suddenly, I was no longer someone to be accepted on her own terms. I was someone he had a plan for, someone he was going to love forever. If only he could just fix a few small things about me. The night after we arrive in Lisbon is the first time in my life that I say no to sex. Sean is upset when I tell him I can't keep pretending, and I don't think he believes me when I insist that I didn't lie or mislead him. I had wanted this to work as much as he did. I can't keep lying to him or to myself. Somehow, we finished the trip together, awkward and cold, sleeping as far apart as possible on the beds we have to share. I think of Portugal, the empire that had taken Brazil, the warm place that had nurtured me, and set about to improve it. If you ask them, they had succeeded, even though they'd lost control of her eventually. But had they improved her or destroyed her, ultimately? When I return home, I find a 30-page email in my inbox outlining my many faults. The tone is paternal, as if he is doing me a favor by trying to help me become a better version of myself. Yet another man trying to change me. Yet another man telling me I am not enough. Ah! I thought that was the end of the chapter. Of course it's not. But the whole Graveyard of Empires part. Okay. Yeah, close call there. And just to note, like, he was a good guy. At least I felt safe saying no. Because that's a whole nother aspect of this that the boys don't usually understand. I did not read it. I deleted it. I copy and pasted it to see how long it was into a Word document, but then I deleted it without reading it. But my co-writer did not like that sentence. So, cutting room floor. Yes, thanks for liking and clicking. Yeah, exactly. And yet another failed relationship to put behind me as I once again focus on my career. My team is ready for our major Afghanistan country brief to the battalion, nearly 1,000 people, with me as one of the Army's newest captains. Not for the first time, it strikes me how acutely aware we always are of each other's rank in the Army. A strong group norm that we all wear smack in the middle of our chests. I'm sorry, I got confused by the knitting and then I spaced out. Now we have to do it again. Why am I still wearing my earbuds? Back. Shush. Shush. And yet another failed relationship to put behind me as I once again focus on my career. My team is ready for our major Afghanistan country brief to the battalion, nearly 1,000 people, with me as one of the Army's newest captains. Not for the first time, it strikes me how acutely aware we always are of each other's rank in the Army, a strong group norm that we all wear smack in the middle of our chests. It's so much easier to decipher than the rank and power system in America, or the one I grew up with inside the family. I wonder if there's any group on Earth that does not have some kind of hierarchy, some systemic way for the few to hold power over the many. As usual, I am standing in front of a room that is 95% men for the intelligence pre-deployment brief. It is my team's moment to shine, to spend 2 hours talking to the entire unit, going province by province, hotspot by hotspot, across eastern Afghanistan, an operational area with over 30,000 personnel and an area of 124,675 square kilometers. I know every detail of this terrain almost as well as I knew southern Afghanistan less than 2 years before, and better than I know any part of the United States. Afghanistan, my voice booms out through the loudspeaker, which has often been called the graveyard of empires. Today, we will fly you through the provinces of... I flip to the agenda slide, and we are off. And we kick ass. Afterward, when one of the majors approaches me, I assume it will be with congratulations. Instead, I am met with a look of consternation by my former boss, an evangelical Christian who I'd clashed regularly with in the past about the constant prayers, chaplain visits, and Christian ideology embedded in our language. Daniela, he says, pulling me aside, graveyard of empires? Really? You just can't go saying that to a group of soldiers. What were you thinking? I am confident about my position. I explained to him that the whole point of the country brief is to give historical and physical context to the place we are going. Intelligence can't afford to ignore things because they are inconvenient. Underestimating the insurgents, thinking of them as stupid and backwards, thinking that we are automatically the best just because we are Americans, that's what kills soldiers over there. Besides, sir, I finish, America is not an empire. Or are we admitting that we are? Daniela, he says, I'm just saying because I care about you and your career that you can't go around saying that. It's not a good look for you. It makes you look critical when you're supposed to be supportive as one of our unit's leaders. And just what do you think that does to morale? With all due respect, sir, I say, I'm the intelligence officer, not the chaplain. We do the things that go boom and bump in the night, not the morale. I move on, my head spinning, knowing my job is to be the bad guy, not to just go along with whatever messaging the good guys want to believe. My job is intense, demanding, and with little room for failure at go time. This training period is intended to toughen me up enough that I have no problem looking the operations officer in the eye, or the senior commander for that matter, and being willing to say, if you do that, sir, here's all the ways the good guys might die. And that's why, at the end of the day, the intelligence officer has no command authority in the military structure, because we aren't supposed to be influenced by the politicking and the programming. We're supposed to spot the holes, figure out the structures of power that make them tick, understand not just that the terrorists are radicalized, but why, and thus be able to notice the indicators before they can shoot one of our helicopters out of the sky. We aren't supposed to drink the Kool-Aid that they give to the ground guys, the grunts. As I load my green duffel bags once again onto the plane that will take me to Afghanistan on Christmas Eve, I know that it isn't my job to protect the good guys from their feelings. It is my job to protect us from them. And that job I can do, I know, whether I ultimately believe in the mission or not. I've been training for it all my life. And then I am in Kyrgyzstan. Nope, not going to mispronounce that word. And then I am in Kyrgyzstan, waiting to be issued my combat vest and bulletproof plates before loading the military jet that will take us into the war zone. Headphones in and mildly swaying to the music, I'm surprised to hear a friendly voice directly behind me saying, "Backstreet Boys? Really, ma'am?" Spinning around, I find myself face to chest with tall, blue-eyed Chief Warrant Officer 2 I'd met recently. One eyebrow cocked in amusement. "Hello, Mr. Young," I say. And something about the way his smile lights up his face makes it feel a bit like Christmas after all. Uh-oh. Did I say that we're deploying at Christmas? Oh, yep. Afghanistan on Christmas Eve. Okay. And then I messed up some knitting. Hang with me just a sec. Now we're on chapter 23, White Privilege. I did release this one a little bit ago. I was just recording that this whole time. Hope I didn't just delete the wrong item.
But had they improved her or destroyed her?
Oh, garbage. Does it still exist in the trash? Why does that say April 23rd? What is going on? What's the date today? 22. So we don't have anything from 22. I just deleted it. Sons of bitches. Yes, that's weird. But I think I'm going to have to record that last half of the chapter again. Sorry, folks. It's just me messing things up. Good thing, 'cause I'm about to read that part over again. I just have to make sure that my photos are doing the right thing. Okay. Delete this one. Thank you. Can't just like this one. Close the camera. Now can you delete it? Thank you.
If you ask them, they can believe it, even though they've lost control of it.
All right. Now. Camera, you're half the screen. Thank you. And yet another failed relationship to put behind me as I once again focus on my career. My team is ready for our major Afghanistan country brief to the battalion, nearly 1,000 people, with me as one of the Army's newest captains. Not for the first time, it strikes me how acutely aware we always are of each other's rank in the Army. A strong group norm that we all wear smack in the middle of our chests. It is so much easier to decipher than the rank and power system in America, the one I grew up with. Third time's the charm. Yes, this chapter's called The Graveyard of Empires. And yet another failed relationship to put behind me as I once again focus on my career. My team is ready for our major Afghanistan country brief to the battalion. Nearly 1,000 people, with me as one of the Army's newest captains. Not for the first time, it strikes me how acutely aware we always are of each other's rank in the Army. A strong group norm that we all wear smack in the middle of our chests. It's so much easier to decipher than the rank and power system in America, or the one that I grew up with inside the family. I wonder if there's any group on Earth that does not have some kind of hierarchy, some systemic way for the few to hold power over the many. As usual, I'm standing in front of a room that is 95% men for the intelligence pre-deployment brief. It is my team's moment to shine, to spend 2 hours talking to the entire unit, going province by province, hotspot by hotspot, across eastern Afghanistan, an operational area with over 30,000 personnel, and an area of an operational area with over 30,000 personnel and an area of 124,675,000 square kilometers. I know every detail of this terrain almost as well as I knew southern Afghanistan less than 2 years ago, and better than I knew any part of the United States. Afghanistan, my voice booms out through the loudspeaker, which has often been called the graveyard of empires. Today, we will fly you through the provinces of... I flip to the agenda slide and we are off. And we kick ass. Afterward, when one of the majors approaches me, I assume it will be with congratulations. Instead, I am met with a look of consternation by my former boss, an evangelical Christian who I'd regularly clashed with in the past about the constant prayers, chaplain visits, and Christian ideology embedded in our language. Daniela, he says, pulling me aside, graveyard of empires? Really? You can't just go around saying that to a group of soldiers. What were you thinking? I am confident about my position. I explained to him that the whole point of the country brief is to give historical and physical context to the place where we are going. Intelligence can't afford to ignore things because they are inconvenient. Underestimating the insurgents, thinking of them as stupid and backward, thinking that we are automatically the best just because we are Americans, that's what kills soldiers over there. Besides, sir, I finish, America is not an empire. Or are we admitting that we are? Daniela, he says, I'm just saying, because I care about you and your career, that you can't go around saying that. It's not a good look for you. Makes you look critical when you're supposed to be supportive as one of our unit's leaders. And just what do you think that does to morale? With all due respect, sir, I say, I'm the intelligence officer, not the chaplain. We do the things that go boom and bump in the night, not the morale. I wasn't recording any of that. Oh. Okay, where did I get to?
An area of one.
An operational area with over 30,000 personnel and an area of 124,675 square kilometers. I know every detail of this terrain almost as well as I knew southern Afghanistan less than 2 years before, and better than I know any part of the United States. Afghanistan, my voice booms out over the loudspeaker, which has often been called the graveyard of empires. Today, we will fly you through the provinces of... I flip to the agenda slide, and we are off. And we kick ass. Afterward, when one of the majors approaches me, I assume it will be with congratulations. Instead, I am met with a look of consternation by my former boss, an evangelical Christian who I'd clashed regularly with in the past about the constant prayers, chaplain visits, and Christian ideology embedded in our language. Daniela, he says, pulling me aside, graveyard of empires? Really? You just can't go saying that to a group of soldiers. What were you thinking? I'm confident about my position. I explained to him that the whole point of the country brief is to give historical and physical context to the place we are going. Intelligence can't afford to ignore things because they are inconvenient. Underestimating the insurgents, thinking of them as stupid and backward, thinking that we are automatically the best just because we are the Americans, that's what kills soldiers over there. Besides, sir, I finish, America is not an empire. Or are we admitting that we are? Daniela, he says, I'm just saying, because I care about you and your career, that you can't go around saying that. It's not a good look for you. Makes you look critical when you're supposed to be supportive as one of our unit's leaders. And just what do you think that does to morale? With all due respect, sir, I say, I'm the intelligence officer, not the chaplain. We do the things that go boom and bump in the night, not the morale. I move on, my head spinning, knowing my job is to be the bad guy, not to just go along with whatever messaging the good guys want to believe. My job is intense, demanding, with little room for failure at go time. This training period is intended to toughen me up enough that I have no problem looking the operations officer in the eye, or the senior commander for that matter, and being willing to say, if you do that, sir, here's all the ways the good guys might die. That's why, at the end of the day, the intelligence officer has no command authority in the military structure, because we aren't supposed to be influenced by the politicking and the programming. We're supposed to spot the holes, figure out the structures of power that make them tick, understand not just that the terrorists are radicalized, but why. and thus be able to notice the indicators before they can shoot one of our helicopters out of the sky. We aren't supposed to drink the Kool-Aid that they give to the ground guys, the grunts. As I load my green duffel bags once again onto the place that will... As I load my green duffel bags once again onto the plane that will take me to Afghanistan on Christmas Eve, I know that it isn't my job to protect the good guys from their feelings. It's my job to protect us from them. And that job I can do, I know, whether I ultimately believe in the mission or not. I've been training for it all my life. And then I am in Kyrgyzstan, waiting to be issued my combat vest and bulletproof plates before loading the military jet that will take us into the war zone. Headphones in and mildly swaying to the music, I'm surprised to hear a friendly voice directly behind me. Backstreet Boys, ma'am? Really? Spinning around, I find myself face to face. Okay, he'll have to be the one that listens to this part over and over again. Headphones in and mildly swaying to the music, I'm surprised to hear a friendly voice directly behind me. Backstreet Boys, ma'am? Really? Spinning around, I find myself face to chest with the tall, blue-eyed Chief Warrant Officer 2 I'd met recently, one eyebrow cocked in amusement. Hello, Mr. Young, I say. And something about the way his smile lights up his face makes it feel a bit like Christmas after all. Yeah, I like the part, it's in both the books, where he's like, introduces Mr. Young, and obviously my name right in the book is Daniela Mestinek Young, so you kind of know. Same way that you always introduce the X with terms that like, let you know we don't like this guy that much. And now my yarn is getting tangled in my microphone, which is a problem I'm sure everybody has. He does get the good parts, I think, in this chapter. Chapter 23, White Privilege, Bagram, 2014. Do that thing where I don't not mention the country, though I think people get it. Bagram. Chapter 23, White Privilege, Bagram, Afghanistan, 2014. We run through the dusty streets of Bagram Airfield, Tom Young's long legs eating up the ground beside me, easily keeping the pace I've been pushing us at for nearly 8 miles this morning. I've been trying to tell myself we're only friends, but in the past few weeks, I can feel myself softening when I'm around him, telling him everything about me, without the usual careful calculation about what I think people can or cannot handle. For some reason, I'm not scared of scaring him away. He keeps running along beside me, listening to my stories without judgment, without wanting me to be anyone other than who I already am, sometimes cocking his head in an adorable way, as though physically trying to see an idea from a different point of view. This wasn't at all part of my plan, certainly not my professional goals. But by the time I realize I'm in love with him, there's no help for it. Where do you think you'll end up after all this? He asks me, referring to our future freedom in our imagined lives after the army, in the way we all did. Some distant and ill-defined unknown, but something we knew we each dreamed of. It reminds me of being a kid in the cult, huddled up with Michaela, talking about the real world, the outside, the system, where anything can happen, where you can make any choice you want, be who you want to be, outside of the familiar womb of the group. I don't know where I'll live, I say. I don't know if I'll ever live anywhere permanently. I'm like that with places and relationships. I trail off, looking at him through the side of my eyes, but he holds his pace without a hitch. I move on. It's why the army works for me. I don't know how much longer I'll stay in the army, but I know it will be only a few more years at best, until I figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Tom is on his 15th year already. I know he's committed and will stay until he reaches 20 years and can retire on half pay. I have to live in a city with a major international airport, I say. That's literally my only requirement. And don't say Nashville has an international airport like people at Fort Campbell always do. That's BS. I mean somewhere where I can get on a single flight and be in another country in a few hours. I know that basically leaves me New York, DC, Dallas, or Atlanta. The South is not for me, and New York City is way too cold to even pretend I'd survive there. But let's face it, as an ex-intelligence officer, I'll likely be headed to the capital to work for one of the three-letter agencies. That's our well-known slang for the CIA, DIA, NSA, and all the other myriad agencies that I could choose from as a trained, war-minted officer with a top-secret clearance. I've thought about joining the force or other units that do cooler things than we do here, that would send me abroad, anywhere other than here. Have you ever considered Seattle? Tom asks after a thoughtful moment. I'm not sure I've ever thought about Seattle other than that time in the car with Nina at the Border Patrol stop. I think there's a Meg Ryan movie about the place, and that's about the extent of what I know. And I know it's where Tom's from. I'm trying not to, but I can't help but feel like somehow we belong to each other already, and that together we could make it through anything. I find myself wondering if I could let myself know someone that deeply, let him know me that deeply, without reservations. If I could trust that he would see something beautiful inside this old vampire's soul. Later, I'm at work in the Tactical Operations Center, where the operations and intelligence cells work side by side. Our days are usually filled with innocuous banter, but for some reason, the conversation has turned serious today. Come on, ma'am, my friend, Chief Warrant Officer 3, Andrew Sims, says with his loud, booming voice. You of all people know there's no such thing as white privilege. Several of the Lieutenant Mafia, sensing a good debate about to commence, wander over. What do you mean by white privilege? I ask. It's not a term I'm familiar with, but I can already sense I'm about to disagree with whatever Sims says next. He says, this ridiculous idea that somehow, because we are white people, we had a leg up in life and never had to work hard for anything. I mean, I came from nothing, joined the Army at 17 as an infantry ground pounder, and I pulled myself up from there, literally by my bootlaces. I was always ready. I always had a bag packed. I was given opportunities because I worked hard. You know what I mean. You came from worse than I did. I am silent for a long moment, feeling eerily similar to the way I'd felt in Miss Mill's high school classroom, when she'd said that missionaries were agents of imperialism. And even though I didn't yet understand all the details, I knew in my bones that it was true. I know that he's worked his butt off to change his stars, and that I've worked even harder. I also know there is more to it than just our elbow grease. Looking at him, blonde, tall, muscular, handsome, it's easy to see that he'd been handed opportunities for reasons other than simply merit. Being a man in the Army, for one, had given him opportunities denied to others, to me, on the basis of something none of us could control. And I know I've had unfair advantages too, which were completely separate from all of my hardships. from how hard I've had to work. Sorry, I want to change that. And I know I've had unearned advantages too, which were completely separate from all my hardships, from how hard I'd had to work. Finally, I have a term for what I've been seeking to put my finger on for 11 years. Why I was given so many chances in this country. Why I was always treated so much better than I thought I deserved. It's also why people seem so upset when I turn out to be different than they expected. When I don't meekly play the role of the WASP girl they were expecting. Why they are so confused when they realize my identity is way more complicated than that. In this moment, I know deep down, in places I'd never had the language to acknowledge before, that if I had looked or sounded as Brazilian as I sometimes feel, if my skin had been olive-toned like my Hungarian father instead of the snow white of my Slovakian mother, or if I had been the shape and color of my childhood best friend, Michaela, that I would have been treated much, much differently. Now, looking back, I can see in an instant that that has always been true, since the first day I'd set foot in America, all dazed and confused. I'd struggled, yes, but when I pulled myself up by those bootlaces, people were standing there, holding the door open for me. Nobody was trying to shut it in my face or bar me from advancing. I know that plenty of other people, like my friend Nina, like my first boyfriend, Greg, probably couldn't say the same. I scanned the other faces in the crowd, the lieutenant mafia and the soldiers who worked for me, a group of people I started to share. I scanned the other faces in the crowd, the lieutenant mafia and the soldiers who work for me, a group of people I'd started to trust with some of my stories. I can tell that they all expect me to agree with Andrew, to affirm that white privilege couldn't possibly exist, because here I am, the least privileged person among them, someone who came from the hardest things they could imagine and became a great success. A captain in the United States Army, respected, maybe even loved, by my peers and soldiers. As nice as that idea sounds, that I'd worked for everything I had, that I'd been given nothing, I know it for the lie it is. No, I'm sorry, I finally say in reply. I'm not familiar with white privilege as a term, so I'll definitely be doing some more research. But I can list at least 10 times in my life No, I'm sorry, I finally say in reply. I'm not familiar with white privilege as a term, so I'll definitely be doing more research. But I can list at least 10 times that my life has been easier than it would have been because I'm a pretty white girl. And, like all truths, this one is complicated. My life has also been hard in other ways because of the same thing. Now, despite war and danger and tragedy, despite being in one of the hardest situations of my life, that part's in uncultured, the difficulty and struggle is somehow easier to bear. Tom and I have become a team, surviving a hard deployment with stolen moments together, taking the time to build a bond so strong that even calamity can't shake us. And it tries. Months later at our wedding, as he twirls me on the dance floor at our home in Tennessee, amidst 60 of our closest family and friends from everywhere, I can laugh about when I finally... Months later at our wedding, as he twirls me on the dance floor at our home in Tennessee, amidst 60 of our closest friends and family. Have I been filming that one? Damn it. Didn't do the camera. I scanned the other faces in the crowd, the Lieutenant Mafia and the soldiers who work for me, a group of people I'd started to trust with some of my stories. I can tell that they all expect me to agree with Andrew, to affirm that white privilege couldn't possibly exist, because here I am, the least privileged person among them, someone who came from the hardest things they could imagine and became a great success. A captain in the United States Army, respected, maybe even loved, by my peers and soldiers. As nice as that idea sounds, that I'd worked for everything I had, that I'd been given nothing, I know it for the lie it is. No, I'm sorry, I finally say in reply. I'm not familiar with white privilege as a term, so I'll definitely be doing more research. But I can list at least 10 times that my life has been easier than it would have been because I'm a pretty white girl. And, like all truths, this one is complicated. My life has also been hard in other ways because of the same thing. Now, despite war and danger and tragedy, despite being in one of the hardest situations of my life, the difficulty and struggle is somehow easier to bear. Tom and I have become a team, surviving a hard deployment with stolen moments together, taking the time to build a bond so strong that even calamity can't shake us. And it tries. That's in culture. Months later, at our wedding, as he twirls me on the dance floor at our home in Tennessee, amidst 60 of our closest family and friends from everywhere, I can laugh about how, when I finally stopped looking for the quintessential American man and started focusing on just being me, on figuring out who I am without all the trappings of some idea of Americanness that I'd try to put on like armor, that this guy had found me. This American guy who loves country music and follows his Seahawks football team religiously, but is learning to dance salsa, expand his palate, and play chess, and can be my stable partner in any crazy adventure I might dream up for us, the way I dreamed him up before I knew it was him I was looking for. Later that night, he unclasps my dress, pulls down the layers of tulle, exposing my body, glowing and ready. He whispers of love, and his burning gaze speaks of something else, deeper, darker, stunning and uniting us, with nothing held back. No limits, no walls, no secrets, no stories that I need to remember to tell the right way every time. No reason that I can't just be myself. And I know if I can't always love myself the way I deserve, he will love me enough until I can. As we lay in the glow of our love, he trails his hands over my belly, the new roundness just barely visible. Our family will be growing a little earlier than we planned. Don't worry, ma'am, he says teasingly. I'll teach her about Santa Claus, and you'll teach her to be adventurous and brave. And together, we'll teach her to be open-minded to ideas she's never heard about before. I'm going to hold you to that promise, Mr. Young, I say, confident that by his side, I will finally find where I belong in this wonderland. Yeah. I almost cried. This is why you have to practice it a lot. Okay, I'm gonna put this on pause for a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna come back, power through the last 2 chapters. person is great. Okay, starting again. I want to get through. Because I wonder how many of these I'm going to have to redo. Chapter 24, The Salt of the Earth, Recife, Brazil, 2020. We are in Brazil, all three of us that make up my little family. I'm just going to pronounce that in Portuguese the way that I want to. Chapter 24, Salt of the Earth, Recife, Brazil, 2020. We are in Brazil, all three of us that make up my little family, baking on the sands of a beach in Pernambuco, a state in the northeast where I'd never been as a child. My daughter Adeline is 4 years old, raised from birth to speak Portuguese and Spanish, and Tom has just retired from his 20 years of service in the Army. We are here to visit our former exchange student, who now feels like an adopted daughter, beginning what we have planned to be a 2-year-long trip around the world. Watching Tom fall in love with Brazil, teaching Adeline to swim in a Recife lagoon, venturing into the ocean again, feeling the familiarity, the nostalgia, for brilliant moments of happiness I'd lived as a child on beaches like these ones. I realized that the bits of Brazilian culture that had managed to reach me through the commune walls were what had helped me survive. This country is part of my soul, part of my story, a piece of where I'm from, made in Brazil with American parts. We travel to Belo Horizonte, where I buy my family gifts and food at the very market where I spent my childhood begging. Micaela and I are like sisters once again, now watching our children play together, drinking caipirinhas until 4 a.m., and finally talking about all the things we've been too scared to speak out loud as kids. She tells me of her struggles as a systemite here, of looking Brazilian but speaking with her American cult accent, of having nowhere to belong. It's the mirror image of the struggles I've had in America, the negative of a photograph of the life that had played out in full color for me. Though we will never let the aunties win and will spend our lives proving to the uncles that they couldn't break us, they didn't lie about one thing. If you turn your back on the family, you'll be alone. And here we are, decades later, still searching for home. We travel to Chile, then to Argentina, and it is there where we finally feel the first shockwaves of a global pandemic rumbling our way. Tango shows are canceled, and the Argentine barbecue class we signed up for is refunded. The next thing we know, flights are being canceled, and the military is marching down the streets, telling people to stay in their homes. And so we find ourselves on the last flight out of a country that has yet to have a single case of COVID, flying home to Seattle, currently the epicenter in the US. And we have an even bigger problem. We don't have a home. We've sold our house in preparation for Tom's retirement and this trip. And that's how we end up, after celebrating Independence Day 2020 on the West Coast, following the Lewis and Clark Trail backward across the country in a 44-foot RV. Just a helicopter pilot, an intelligence officer, and a trilingual little blonde girl in the summer of Black Lives Matter, COVID-19, and white Trump America, where nobody feels safe and very few feel in power. We visit Colonel Scott Halter, who has continued to be my mentor after I left the Army, encouraging me to write and tell my story. I find myself at his kitchen table, where we talk for hours about our shared pain, about our futures, our thoughts on our own service, our disillusionment with the brand of worshipful patriotism that engulfed the military in the post 9/11 years, and our thoughts about the future of this country. A mentor told me once, Daniela, he says, something I've always tried to remember as a leader. Where you sit is where you stand. Basically, your opinions and view of a situation are a direct result of your personal relationship to it. It is so clear as we drive through the conservative parts of America where grown men glare Tom down for wearing a mask when he fills the RV with diesel, that they are a group of people living in fear. And their fear, though misdirected, against liberals, against Obama, against immigrants, against anyone not just like them, is real. Their way of life is dying. Farming, coal, trucking, the various things that keep small rural America turning, they won't recover. These people have lost their hold on the American dream. But what if the American dream was always a lie? A pretty fiction crafted by those in power to keep the rest of us in a lifelong struggle to be near the top. Exactly like in a cult. I think of so many cult babies, members of my family in one way or another, who settled in these parts of the country and have taken up these same fears. Of myself when I'd first gotten away from one extreme belief system only to settle in Texas and fall prey to Jeff's extremism. These people that I'm seeing aren't strangers to me after all. They are exactly like so many of my brothers and sisters, from the cult, from the army, who've fallen under this immense fear that is overtaking huge swaths of conservative America and driving them deep into the arms of the cult leader who is running the country right now, the man fueling all the flames of extremism. When our RV dies by the side of the road in rural Illinois, we are deep in Trump country. The shoulder is grassy and covered in little yellow and white dandelions, and Adeline runs around grabbing them and blowing them toward me, making wishes. Cuidado com a rua, fica só na grama, mas pode correr, querida. I say to her in Portuguese, the only language I've spoken with her for the past 4 years of our lives. Be careful with the road, stick to the grass, but you can run, darling. I watch Tom walk down the long driveway near where we broke down, where a farmer stands in the distance, gazing at us with curiosity. Do you folks need some help? I hear him say, before Tom gets close enough for quieter conversation. A Keep America Great flag blows gently in the front yard of the house. I feel myself tense, my body warning me of danger. These people won't help us if they know who we really are and what we believe. I take some comfort in knowing that Tom looks like he fits, as he almost always seems to. The typical 6'1", blonde, blue-eyed guy rocking the classic veteran beard. Exactly what so many think of when they think of an American soldier. But I'd noticed that he'd grabbed his 101st baseball cap off its usual place on the dashboard, with its easily identifiable screaming eagle, the symbol we'd both proudly worn for a combined 13 years back and forth to war. The hat is always on hand, without us needing to speak about it, in case we ever have to deal with the police. We know we are safer if they know we are soldiers, as if our lives matter more than anyone else they're supposed to protect. For the first time in 2 months, Tom leaves his face mask behind. I go further down the hill, knowing instinctively that Tom should be the one to conduct this interaction. I tell myself it's because I don't want Adeline going too close without a mask, because I know wearing one isn't an option. Not when we so desperately need these people's help. There's something else too, a nagging suspicion that I shouldn't get anywhere near them. When Tom returns, he ushers us both back into the RV. Okay, we got very lucky, he starts. The whole family seems very friendly. They say we can back right down into their driveway for as long as necessary, use their shop showers and plug in for electricity. That will get us off the road, and I'm hoping this won't take more than a day, but I'm just not sure. I'll probably have to call a mechanic out, and who knows how long that will take. And then he looks at me, a little sheepish. Mr. Tom Young is a former helicopter mechanic, so when he says, like, I'll probably have to call a mechanic, it means he's already been working on trying to fix this RV by himself. And then he looks at me a little sheepishly, a strange sight on my ever-confident husband. So we're good here, but here's the thing. He pauses, shifts, clears his throat, and continues. You just can't be you, okay? I wait for more, though I already know what he means. We're not going to wear masks here, he quickly clarifies. We won't have to interact too much, but the wife wants to show you and Addie the farm. There's cows and other animals. It'll be a good distraction for her while I try to figure this out. But babe, just be careful. No politics and no Portuguese. I nod while we both feel the gravity of that. Portuguese is the only language that I speak with Adeline. It's the only language I have ever spoken to her since birth. It's the language that I tell my little girl that I love her in. Tom and I have worked so hard for this, our little trilingual girl connected with so many cultures. There's a big risk here, we know, that as soon as my daughter begins to associate speaking English with me, her commitment to Portuguese will begin to slip as the dominant culture takes over. It's the age-old story for children of immigrants. But there's a bigger risk right now. The implication is, in Tom's words, is clear. We are safe here if the nice man doesn't realize I'm an other, if I can fit in, if I can play a normal American for long enough. We are okay here for as long as we need, as long as these people, these good, kind, salt of the earth Americans, don't realize what our family We are okay here for as long as we need, as long as these people, these good, kind, salt of the earth Americans, don't realize that our family is what it is, culturally confused and proud of it, led by two veterans who don't buy into the idea of America's superiority at all. What would they do if they knew we look at that Keep America Great flag they fly so proudly and know in our hearts that America isn't great for some, if not most, groups of people, and never has been. We understand that America has never worked for everyone, only for a small subset of privileged people, people who look like us. Tom and I haven't always understood our privileges, but we are trying to, and we know it's our job to use our privilege to do what we can to change systems that privilege some to the disadvantage of others. Standing here, we see, with ultraviolet clarity, the underlying xenophobia and toxic patriotism hidden in the increasing nationalistic conversations sprouting up in many parts of the country. I also see the reality of their conundrum. They are the people who, though promised the American dream if they agreed to uphold the systems that bind us, are instead finding that they themselves have become lost in the margins of America, in a social system falling down around their heads. They are afraid, and their fear is real. People in the margins are always desperate. I know that because I've lived in the margins all my life. And that makes them susceptible to the promises of a dynamic leader who claims to see them, claims to care about their pain, and promises to bring back their hope of being the best once again, to make them great, which is what they feel they're owed, what they are entitled to, because they've played by the rules of the game they were taught. And now that chessboard has been doused with gasoline and set on fire, and they don't know how they are going to win the game anymore. As much as I hate it, I know I will comply with everything Tom has said. Right now, we just need to pass. And I know that it is a huge privilege that we even can. That the way we look is a protective barrier we can use whenever we need it. The privilege of our whiteness, the ability to blend, to fade, to not stand out. Where you sit is where you stand, indeed. I think I can get through it before 12:30 and then run and eat a taco and go get a tattoo. Can you take my photo? Chapter 25, Enemies, both foreign and domestic. Washington, D.C., 2021. In the first days of January 2021, Tom and I haul moving boxes up and down 4 floors of our new townhouse in Maryland, only 20 minutes away from the heart of the Capitol building in D.C. Both of us can't wait for the new president to take office. It's been especially hard for me watching this country I fought for being led by a cult leader for the last 4 years. I've tried to avoid the news for my own sanity. To a cult baby like me, living in America during the Trump administration has been just like living life under the drunken, rambling mandates of David Berg. I've begun a master's degree program at Harvard in industrial and organizational psychology, and am framing much of my research projects around looking at similarities between cults, militaries, terrorist groups, and other kinds of closed-off societies, and finding threads running through them all. I know exactly what cultic thinking looks like, and I know that's exactly what we have seen come over much of the United States. The rush to extremes, the world always... I know exactly what cultic thinking looks like, and I know that's exactly what we have seen come over much of the United States. The rush to extremes the world always experiences during times of drastic change, when systems are failing and power is shifting, and nobody really knows how it will turn out. The morning of January 6th dawns for me with a special excitement. A major literary agency is scheduled to send out the book proposal for my first memoir to editors. This story that has become the culmination of all the work I've done, thinking about groups and my place in them. It has been over a year in the making, most of my rough drafts written as my family navigated the country in our RV. The air around me is crackling with excitement, and I know that somehow in 2021, my little book about cults and group behavior is going to find a home. I know because 2020 closed out with pretty much one single question on the lips of 300 million Americans. How the hell did we get here? I know I have some answers to that. Answers that maybe others are missing. Those who had not yet experienced living under tyrannical, unstable authoritarians. Instead of January 6th being the day of my private victory, of the beginning of a life-changing book deal, it becomes a day of national terror. Tom and I watch a mob of domestic terrorists, the kind we'd once swore our very lives to defend America against, storm the U.S. Capitol building, just a short drive from our new home. In much the same way, I could always see the cult behavior and groupthink in what other people thought were just normal groups. Tom and I can see something we know few of the civilians watching are likely to pick up on. There are veterans in that mob, so many of them. People who'd once sworn, just like us, to defend the Constitution have now become the domestic enemies themselves. Veterans can almost always pick out other veterans. It's in the way we carry ourselves, a symbol hidden somewhere obvious, a specific hand gesture, the subtle, buzzing alertness of being always on guard, of trying to minimize your exposure and blind spots, and to never sit with your back to the door. It's in the kinds of special equipment we carry with us to battle. It is clear to us that not only is this a planned and coordinated attack, but that it was planned and coordinated by some of our own. We know the guy with zip ties dangling from his belt is a veteran, long before we know he is retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Larry Rendell Brock, Jr. And we know he never planned for this to be a peaceful protest, because he brought those zip ties along to be used as handcuffs. Americans on the whole will learn in the coming days that over 20% of the defendants implicated in the January 6th attack are veterans of some branch of the U.S. military. And people begin to ask with shock over and over again, how could this happen? It's the same question people always ask when a cult makes the news. But I know the truth. I have been trained on extremist ideology, on cult think, since the day I was born. I think of the many people Tom and I know from our 26 plus combined years in the Army, and many of whom we've watched. I think of the many people Tom and I know from our 26 plus combined years in the Army, many of whom we've watched fall slowly but steadily further and further down the path of radicalization. Friends like Andrew Sims, who'd become one of my closest coworkers and friends, who stood beside me through a hard deployment, who brought me into his family. He'd been the one to get a pastor's license so that he could preside over my wedding to Tom. And he had his... He'd been the one who'd gotten a pilot's... He was already a pilot. He'd been the one who'd gotten a pastor's license so that he could preside over my wedding to Tom, and he and his wife had become some of our closest friends. That had all begun to change last election, slowly but surely. On January 6th, our rift became complete, with him declaring his sympathies with the Capitol mob, and me in tears, all too familiar with losing friends and family because of extremism. In the coming days, I find out that Auntie Aurora, the sister of Mary's dad, who had no problem coaching and preparing me for exploitation on the family's videos in my earliest years, who'd for decades run the Family Care Foundation, an organization founded specifically to defraud the U.S. government out of grant money, is one of the patriots now. I remember her as the fun, kind, young auntie who created a youth group for the family kids in San Diego to get together. She'd been born into the same kind of extremism I was, raised to call America Babylon the whore, and she'd never gotten out. And now it seems she'd gone full circle from being born and raised in our America-hating cult to being a part of a domestic terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol. And now it seems she'd gone full circle from being born and raised in our America-hating cult to being part of a domestic terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol in the name of patriotism. I turn her into the FBI for her participation, like so many Americans will do when they come face to face with incontrovertible evidence that their loved one had been radicalized into extremism, often right under their noses. Unlike most Americans, I'm not shocked that people who'd once been close to me ended up ideologically so far away. I understand all too easily how it happens. Scholars have shown over and over again that falling prey to a cult has nothing to do with intelligence, income, or even religion. It happens simply when someone is seeking, often because they feel a strong sense of impending doom, of fear for their future, and finds a group that enthralls them with ideas and holds them in isolation long enough that they begin to reflect the group norms. Eventually, many are not able to see through the circular logic and conspiracy theories, and they continue on even when the promised apocalypse never arrives. Following their leader unquestioningly even to the steps of the U.S. Capitol. 6 weeks later, I am being sworn in over the phone at a military tribunal. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I'm glad they can't see me roll my eyes at the God part. I do, I say, automatically lowering my voice to sound more commanding, the way I had learned to do as an Army officer. I wonder briefly what Jeff's reaction is in that courtroom, hearing my voice after 11 years. I realize I know the answer. I know exactly what his face looks like in this moment. Stony, cold, staring straight ahead. He never did show any emotion, except anger. I am strong, I remind myself. He can't reach me. He can't affect me anymore. It's been a long time since I've prayed. This feels close. Can you tell the court your full name, military record, what you do now, and your state of residence for the record? Daniela Claire Mestenek Young, I state clearly, suddenly terrified that Jeff now has my new last name. Army Captain, Military Intelligence, 2009 to present. I still hold a commission in the inactive reserves. 2 deployments with the 101st, the regular bling everyone has, and a Presidential Volunteer Service Award. I pause, letting that marinate, knowing the power of that last bit of my record. I'm currently at Harvard Extension School studying organizational psychology, focused on group behavior, cults, and, I pause again for effect, extremism. I know from experience that they will be stuck on the Harvard name for a few seconds, and then tune back in time to hear extremism. No matter that the Army prefers men, and especially combat arms men, it will be hard for them not to take my words seriously. Then, with my heart pounding so loudly, I'm afraid everyone can hear it through the telephone, I say what I'd rehearsed with the lawyer. I'd rather not give any information about my whereabouts for the safety of my family. It is the truth. Tom and I had discussed how dangerous it could be to testify. The lust for violence in Jeff's online screeds had been as clear as day, as he called for nuclear war against America's most populous cities, and offered to use his combat training to train warriors in the coming race war. What was there to stop him from trying to kill me, especially now that he would have me to blame if he lost everything as a result of today? I know Jeff had told his lawyer not to worry about me, that we'd had 0 contact in a decade, that there was nothing I could say to hurt him. I know he thinks this is the truth. He always thought he was smarter than me. I know that I can confirm for the court everything they need to know, because the second I'd opened that email with his name on it and read the accusations that followed, everything became so clear to me. Jeff's lawyer lazily tries to slander me with the old, tired adultery claims, saying I'm a disgruntled ex-wife, now part of the conspiracy against him. The board doesn't give that much credence, moving on to question me about what I know about Jeff from earlier years. When they ask me if he'd ever shown a penchant for violence, I talk about his love of guns, how he'd almost been kicked off campus once for having a weapon in his apartment, and a second time for pulling a gun at a fraternity event. Both times, he'd gotten off with a slap on the wrist. I tell them about my puppy, Zeus, how pitiful and tiny he looked next to that handgun that was bigger than him. I tell them about the threat Jeff had posted on Craigslist. And then I tell them that I, an Army captain, more than familiar with violent extremism, am scared of him now. And then they ask me the same question everyone is asking. Why do you think it happened? If, as you say, Captain Young, began one of the high-ranking brass, he's likely had this sort of ideology for a long time, for at least a decade or more, according to you. How was he able to get so far in his Army career? I mean, I'm looking at his records, and they are stellar. Top-notch evaluations. Promoted, always on time. Good runner. It's hard not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. I think of all the footage Tom and I have watched of January 6th, knowing how many veterans and active military are deep into extremism and always have been. Now people are actually paying attention, forcing the military into situations like this, where they have to listen to people like me. Because, sir, I answer, he's good at putting on a face, at showing the army what they want to see. Right place, right time, right uniform, right? I quote the ubiquitous army phrase we all use to promise our members that anyone can succeed, no talent necessary. Anyone can be a useful part of the machine, even a high-ranking and powerful piece, as long as they put their head down and go along and don't make trouble. The truth is, the U.S. Army loves violent men that look like they can kill you with their strong, bare hands. That's their bread and butter. That's why Jeff was a resounding success, even with all his extremism humming along below the surface. People full of hatred are great at killing people, and what the military cares about, above all else, is maintaining its power. It all made sense to me by the time I'd finished reading the 75-page PowerPoint presentation that an ex-military intelligence soldier and his buddies had put together, connecting a random screen name on the Army Reddit thread to active Army Reserves Major William Jeffrey Poole. I hadn't been able to see the indicators so many years ago, having just come out of my own extremist prison. But looking back, now so experienced in studying the processes of radicalization into extremist thinking, in cults, in terrorist groups, in veterans that stormed the Capitol, I could see the truth clear as day. The truth about Jeff, the truth about me, and the truth about America. It was that thing I'd been trying to figure out since I was 15 years old and first arrived in America, alone and afraid. The reason I'd always been treated so much better than I deserved. Why policemen looked at me with smiles, but with suspicion at my brown and black-skinned friends. The summer of protests in 2020 had made so painfully clear to anyone who didn't have their heads in the sand that it wasn't just about bias. It was about white supremacy. It was about violence. It was the belief, conscious or not, that we were better, that everything we had was because we deserved it. And every struggle they had, well, maybe they deserved it too. What I could clearly see now was that from the second I'd set foot in America, white supremacy had worked tirelessly on its mission to radicalize me, as it does to all white people, insidiously, quietly, offering us better treatment if we'll agree to uphold systems that keep others down. Of course, Jeff claims the posts don't belong to him, that some low-ranking and disgruntled soldier is trying to set him up. I know Jeff had been the author of those posts, even if these men making the decisions didn't know it beyond a reasonable doubt yet. I know because the screen name that had been used was an obscure word from a dead Germanic language, a term for fighter that is quietly used in white nationalist circles by all those who call themselves the alt-white. It's a word I'd been introduced to when I was 19 years old by Jeff, when he was only 21 himself. A word I had not heard since. The screen name, one of the many clues that the poster in question had used, was Nibor. With all due respect, gentlemen, it's because angry, violent white men is who the U.S. Army selects for, I finish. In the days that follow, I walk around my new townhouse in a daze, under both the news of my memoir Uncultured, selling in a life-changing deal, and the sudden return of Jeff into my life. I'm plagued by flashbacks, hearing his voice over and over again in my mind. All those words that seemed so innocuous to me at 19 years old, complimentary and like they would make me strong. I can't stop staring at the reflection of my stupid face in the mirror, wishing I could rip it off and discard it, like the many costumes and identities I'd worn throughout my life. Your perfect face, Daniela. the beautiful children we'll have, the most perfect look in the world. Your Eastern European beauty, those high cheekbones. I had often wondered why he chose me. Maybe it was because I seemed so lost, so malleable. Maybe because predators have an instinct for victims who are already used to being prey. And maybe my face, my perfect Aryan face, was also why he'd wanted me. And he had mistakenly assumed he wouldn't have to contend too much with the mind behind it. And sorry, we're not going to get to the epilogue today. Yes, very satisfying to get him on something so specific. I was like, you could have just been nice to me. Not that obviously I would have testified against him, even if he'd been nice to me in the divorce, but it is very satisfying.